All 14 talks by Leonard Peikoff at the Ford Hall Forum. 14 talks, they're all available. See, here's the thing. This is from the ARI campus. 1961, Ayn Rand receives a speaking invitation from the Ford Hall Forum. This is a group that sponsors free public lectures on social and political issues, and she spoke there. She spoke there every year until her death, 1982. And from 1982 to 2003, Leonard Peikoff, philosopher, continued that tradition. Over this period, Peikoff gave several talks in which he applied Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism to the wider range of topics, including education and medicine and the religious right, fall of communism, art, crime, and America's response to 9/11. But today, we have the honor of speaking to James Valliant about the very first, really the first lecture he gave was Ayn Rand's lecture, The Sanction of the Victim. She unfortunately passed away before she could deliver that outstanding lecture. But the first lecture he wrote and presented at the Ford Hall Forum was, in fact,
this is his
Assault
first
from the Ivory Tower.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Ayn Rand in 1961 brought the house down. She really did. And the next year she brought the house down. And whether you booed her or stood on your feet cheering her, the Ford Hall Forum realized they had solid gold on their hand. And so they invited her back again and again and again, and it was dubbed the Objectivist Easter because it always happened in spring around this time, in fact. And this is, in 1983, Dr. Peikoff gives his own first lecture at the Ford Hall Forum. I was an undergraduate at NYU at the time, so I was privileged enough to take the train up to Boston during these early speeches of Dr. Peikoff's and get up there and hear it for myself. And of course, this is a very appropriate lecture for Dr. Peikoff, Assault from the Ivory Tower. After spending so many years getting his PhD from NYU in philosophy, from the eminent Sidney Hook as his dissertation advisor, Dr. Peikoff brings his powerful and unique insight to everything that's wrong with academia and its assault on American values. And by American values, I mean the values going back to America's founding, the Enlightenment, the belief in reason, the belief in the individual, of the ideas that really are the bedrock of America. And it's those ideas that have come under systematic assault, particularly in the 20th and 21st centuries, from universities. And universities are the hotbed of the anti-American ideas. There's no question about it. And if anything, Dr. Peikoff, over the last because it's been almost 40 years now, it was 1983, here we are in 2022. In fact, it's almost, 39 years, almost a couple of weeks away from, or a month away from when he gave this talk. And frankly, it's mostly just the last 40 years have been a sad continuation of exactly what he's talked about. Now, yes, we can talk about the ups and downs of it, but boy, what a powerful lecture. I urge everyone to check this lecture out. Again,
and as you say, this was appropriate because Leonard Peikoff was a professor of philosophy, but rather than give examples from his background, which might to some people sound subjective, he actually petitioned objectivists to send him examples of what they see out in the real life, which to me is a much more
they sent
rational and inductive ways.
Descriptions. They gave him more. In fact, I remember him talking about this afterwards. He had far more material than he could there was a huge amount of material that he would have liked to have included, but he selectively chose actually the best because so many students had sent in course descriptions, statements from their professors, newspaper clippings. Yeah.
So just real quick, because I should have said it already by now, but in the chat they're asking when was the speech given. This was 1983. This was printed in the Objectivist Forum as a separate essay in the forum, and it was later included in the Voice of Reason compilation. So if you have either one of those, you've already got it. In my show notes on Facebook, you'll find links to the essay online, and you can even listen to the audio. And
there are the published version of it in the book Voice of Reason is slightly different from the audio version that you'll hear that's available on YouTube. I urge people to check out both. He's got slightly different examples in the middle of the, but it's basically the same essay with some slightly different examples. So check out both if you have the opportunity, both the live you can hear Dr. Peikoff giving it too, the live presentation, and of course its printed form, either in the objectivist form or the voice of reason.
Excellent. Now, Dr. Peikoff presents the topic, and he says this by way of introduction. Intellectuals around the world generally take a certain pride, whether deserved or not, in their own country's achievements and traditions. When they lash out at some group, it is not their nation, but some villain allegedly threatening it. And then he gives examples, and he contrasts it with this, quote, "This is not true of America. One of the most striking things I observed when I first came here was the disapproval, the resentment, even the hatred of America, of the country as such, and of most things American, which is displayed by American intellectuals. It is especially evident among professors in the humanities and social sciences," unquote. And again, rather than simply offering examples from his own personal experiences in education, he asked objectivists around the country, he said, tell me what they are being taught on college campuses on basic issues. He says, I received a flood of eloquent mailing clippings. And I'd like to dive into this discussion with the first example he offers. He says, from a textbook on the craft of writing presented by professors of rhetoric at Berkeley. And then he quotes this textbook. What do Plato's opinions or any other writer's opinions we might choose to study have to do with learning to write? Well, everything. Before anything good can come out of writing, the students must at least sense the presuppositions of the writer in his civilization. And the first presupposition is this. We do not really know, surely and indubitably, the answer to any important question. It would be very comfortable to be able to act upon the basis of immutable truth, but it is not available to us. And then right in the next example, Dr. Peikoff quotes a prominent Harvard astronomer. Today in science, the professor said, there is no belief as such. There is only probability. Now, James, you remember in our discussion of the analytic-synthetic dichotomy, we talked about the epistemological roots of this anti-certainty skepticism, which nowadays manifests itself as probability worship. But now I see this goes back decades, this idea. We don't know anything, but we can assign numbers to.
Yeah, let's be less wrong.
Let's be less wrong.
Yeah.
When I was attending New York University, getting my undergraduate degree, that in history particularly, that is exactly how we were taught history. And it doesn't matter whether it's contemporary history, and you could know the facts, from your own experience and firsthand knowledge, or the dimmest of ancient history. It doesn't really matter how the state of the evidence. All we can really know is our interpretation of it. Indubitable truth is inaccessible to us, and it's all a question of probability. I'll raise my innocent little hand and I say, how would we assess the probability of something if we don't know what certainty would look like? Or how would we assess the probability of something without certainty in the laws of probability? How would we assess the certainty of something? And you can go on and on to point out the self-contradictions and stolen concepts that are just rife in that kind of assertion. It will not faze them. It does not faze them at all, those kind of contradictions. No, well, it's probabilities upon probabilities upon probabilities, which of course lead to a big zero. No one can calculate a probability, much less a possibility, without knowing what certainty would look like, what the criteria for knowledge would be in the first place, much less have the rules of probability going into it. So there's a mountain of knowledge that any assertion of probability asserts. They never realize the self-contradiction that's involved. And yet I was having a conversation about ancient Christianity, non-objectivist, just the other day on a podcast. And of course, my interlocutor was absolutely convinced that there is no certain knowledge. The best we can ever do is a probability on a probability on a probability. Yes.
Yeah, we're 5 nines. We're real close. But to this intellect.
No, the issue, you know what the issue was? The Holocaust. The Holocaust, something that occurred within living memory.
We can't be certain it happened, or we can't be certain it was evil. Probably both, right?
You're not certain millions of civilians were slaughtered by Hitler, mostly because they were Jewish or anti-Nazi? No. We can only know that. I would say that has a relatively high degree of probability, he said. Maybe 98, 99% probability. But can we be certain that Hitler killed millions of people?
That is That is not
Yeah,
just
yeah.
absurd. That is morally offensive.
It is
Morally
offensive.
offensive.
And of course, if you just take that to a simple case of somebody murdered somebody in the United States, what kind of justice are you going to be getting with that kind of thinking? And I looked at this article and I looked at what all these knucklehead professors were writing. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if they were just being innocently trying to be lazy? Like,
No,
but
lazy.
no.
Way
They
too
actually think what they're saying is somehow intellectually deep.
Well, this is the power
That's
of
it.
ideas.
The muddier, the
Yes.
deeper. The
Yes.
more ambiguous, the less you can you can sort it. The more confusing we can be, the deeper it obviously is. Boy, that is a purely philosophical phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah.
But when we come out of the universities and we get to public intellectuals, people who it's hard for me to fathom that they have the nefarious motives of these college professors. Think of Steven Pinker's great book, Rationality. And its big flaw is this epistemological grounding, where
Precisely.
anytime you
so
claim
many
certainty,
things,
it must
points
be
to make.
faith.
You think about all the wonderful points he has to make, and some of them are great, solid, factual observations, comparisons of today with the past, put it in context. But then, of course, he undermines everything he says with this uncertainty, this cosmic uncertainty. Who can really know? And it's all just probability at best.
And outside the objectivist community, how do you escape that? The universities that Dr. Peikoff's talking about here have taken, great minds. Yesterday, we talked to Don Watkins, and he mentioned Julia Galef and her book, The Scout Mindset. Again, great book, except that as soon as you get to the point of everything I'm saying might be wrong, it's probably not. It's pretty high probability. But
Right.
she herself had to rewrite whole sections of the book because she realized she was accepting the idea that she knew things. She was putting certainty in her arguments and realizing, oh, wait, I need to massage this entire context to fit. And again, I see it everywhere. Sam Harris and Eliezer Yudkowsky and just people with great intellects that I respect. And then as soon as they get there, I realize they are suffering from what was happening back here in 1983 and before, because we talked about the spirit of the 60s and where philosophy led us up to that point.
And I know I make this comment every other time we have a talk, but it is amazing how all of these discussions link together, how these essays link together. Ayn Rand's philosophy is so thoroughly well integrated and so well grounded, in fact, that we can't have a lecture about one thing without touching on 6 others. And when you get to those 6 others, then each of those will have 6 others that'll integrate other objectivist ideas. There's no question. One of the things that Dr. Peikoff does so wonderfully in this is attach it to Kant and the devastating impact that Kant has had. Now, we've said this before in previous discussions. Kant is not explicitly advocated by a great many philosophers today. And yet the effect of what he said can be found everywhere. The substitution of the objective for the collective, for example. Kant argued that we can never really know reality in itself. But human beings have these built-in structures, these mechanisms of knowing. And so if you and I agree, and if this is the way you and I see things, if it's so basic even as time and space or logic itself, that's not because reality doesn't have contradictions or because reality has time in it. No. It's because of this common way you and I have of looking at things. Now, while not a lot of philosophers explicitly agree necessarily with Kant's explicit approach, they've in fact adopted that precise approach. The collective now, it's a question of the perspective, your group's perspective. You see, I could assert something and you'd be tossed out. Well, you're just Jim. Jim, that's just you, idiosyncratic and personal to you. But if there's some kind of agreement, particularly among some kind of group, what comes to mind is maybe the most famous popular American historian of the past 40 years, Howard Zinn. His People's History of American Imperialism that came out later was 1980, I think, is when his People's History came out. And his whole perspective was that American history has been taught from the standpoint of certain, as if the political events were more important, as if the political ideology is important, as if, but that's all, and economics, it's all looking at it from a certain standpoint, the standpoint of the white middle class American who's so proud of it. So I'm going to attack this notion of history as a glorification of America somehow by looking at it from the perspective of the common guy. We never look at it from the perspective of the common guy. I was told as a history undergraduate over and over and over, and I would raise my hand and I would say, no, that's not exactly true. Economic history is always looked at that way. Political history is already included them. Literature often includes them. What's being ignored? Oh, well, that's just being done by elites, you see, Mr. Valliant. Real history would look at it from their perspective, and you'll never be able to understand you coming from your white male privilege. You'll never understand what it is to be a oppressed, immigrant. You'll never know what it is to be a woman who didn't have the vote. You'll certainly never know what it was to be an African American, and how dare you think that? And history has sort of stratified that way. So it's history from the standpoint of African Americans. And if you're not African American, well, it just doesn't apply. You're never going to understand it. This is history from their perspective, history from women's perspective, history from the oppressed poor's perspective, and so forth. Today, you don't do objective history. Today in history, you do sort of this group's collective understanding of history. My own field has been unfortunately swamped and corrupted by this kind of neo-Kantianism, this polylogism, by way and effect of Hegel and Marx, by the way. Marx in particular tells them, well, you're a social class. And now with all this intersectionality, it's a question of what oppressed groups do you belong to, because that will determine the perspective that you have, and this unique subjective perspective, which we all sort of have to accept because there is no objective truth. Kant told us that long ago.
Yeah, there's a phrase in Leonard Peikoff's essay online, which, by the way, I put a link to that in the chat, Assault from the Ivory Tower. And it's really helpful, I think. And he uses the term, the exaltation of the social. And just a little background, I just want to read this real quick. The founding fathers, being champions of reason, were champions of the individual. Reason, they held, is an attribute of each man alone by himself. The power of the mind means the power of the individual. With today's anti-reason trend, however, such individualism simply disappears. In our colleges today, therefore, alongside Kant's skepticism about true reality, there's also the other element of Kant, the one systematically promoted by Hegel and Marx, the exaltation of the social. The student gets a powerful double message. You can't know anything, there is no certainty, and society knows. You must adapt to its beliefs. Who are you to question the consensus?
Yes.
And that's the other big thing in history, my own topic, is consensus. If you were to say to someone, well, wait a minute, I have facts that might challenge your consensus viewpoint. Well, I'm sorry, it's out. And all you need to do is cite consensus, a majority, or unfortunately, it's hit the hard sciences. Look at global warming. All you have to do is cite consensus. Well, give me the proof of your models. Your models seem to be fit. Well, the models are themselves, of course, just human constructs. And so the question is the consensus on the models, which are themselves construct. Well, wait a minute. What about the facts? What about convincing me that we're in the middle of a crisis that has to be no. Even for you as a layman, it would be wasting my time. A model is simply our intellectual construct on this. And when it's hitting physical sciences, like meteorology, we're in a pretty desperate state. Or that astronomer that he quoted from Harvard when you're in a state like that, when even science is under assault like that, we're in a bad way.
Yes. Well, in the chat, real quick, because we do have a super chat going, and Apollo Zeus is in for £2. If you contribute to the super chat, put money on a question or just your comment, make it stand out, goes to the Ayn Rand Center UK. Become a member at aynrandcenter.co.uk. You can do that for as little as £9.99 a month. I think I gave the wrong number the last time I mentioned that, but for just £10 a month at the silver level, and you can go up to the gold and I don't even remember, platinum level, diamond level, like any good multi-level marketing. No. Like any good intellectual organization, you can support just as much as you want. But yes. Jeff Bannister is also in with a super chat, $20 Canadian, but that's kind of $20. I shouldn't pick on Canadian money. With American inflation, Jeff, we will catch up to you. And he asks, it is now almost 40 years later. He said that if there were just allowed 1 in 100 professors in universities allowed to teach laissez-faire capitalism, he would still have hope. Is all hope lost now? Now, I have an answer that I'll give at the end of our discussion that relates to that. But one of the things I intended to mention was that we don't have 1 in 100, because that would imply, say, there's 100 professors at a large university. That would imply we have at least one, and I wouldn't say advocate of capitalism, I would say advocate of reason. We don't have that. But we do have Tara Smith. We do have C. Bradley Thompson. We do have Greg Salmieri. We do have Gina Gorlin. We have a host of objectivist professors scattered out there, but also not necessarily objectivist professors, but reasonable ones, like the new University of Austin.
Yes.
That has been discussed by Barry Weiss on her Substack. Always recommended that. But with people on the faculty or the advising faculty like Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Peter Boghossian. So there are some, and I'll talk more about that at the end, but just as a quick answer to Jeff, and James, you may have some thoughts on that.
I don't want to steal your thunder, but Ayn Rand University, what an exciting recent development that is. A place, in fact, for serious students to learn something that will give them a complete antidote to the poison they're taught at most regular universities. That's such an exciting development. And the development of not just professors and people with PhDs who are writing important books, but an entire body of literature now that has developed since Dr. Peikoff spoke. Students of Dr. Peikoff, students of the Objectivist Graduate Student, the Graduate Center, these people actually have started producing in my view, at least a counter movement, which is pro-reason and pro-individual and pro-capitalism, which is exactly, of course, the only antidote to this. What philosophers teach in class becomes the common sense of the next generation, becomes the political policies that people simply assume. Really, if Marxism, for example, is questioned, people in the 20th century saw the evils of Marxism, and there was a huge recoil from any grand ideology. And although there may be a postmodern reaction to grand ideologies, it's still the Marxist agenda that governs by default. And that is exactly what's happening. You can't really not see that on the left, for example, the hard left is getting more and more strident in their ideology as the right becomes less and less principled and more pragmatic. So in that sense, it's not good news. But when you've got an assault on reason that goes as deep as Kant's did, I'll never forget my first day in anthropology class as an NYU undergrad, Introduction to Anthropology. And, one of the examples, I don't know if I covered this earlier, one of the examples that Leonard Peikoff uses in this lecture, and I think one of the brilliant ones was, right at this time, considered one of the pioneers of anthropology, one of the patron saints of anthropology, Margaret Mead, who some decades earlier had written a very famous book, Growing Up in Samoa. By around the early 1980s, she was under serious assault by it took them that long, by the way, for them to question, someone to actually go out and check Margaret Mead's facts. It didn't turn out to be the idyllic, primitive, non-technological, peace-loving, Rousseau, and Peikoff points out it's all just new Rousseau, right? Man in a perfect state of nature, ideas of Margaret Mead. And it was truly taken apart. Life in Samoa was not the idyllic paradise that Margaret Mead claimed it to be. Again, my innocent hand will go up and challenge Margaret Mead to my anthropology professor, and his response is, well, the problem with Margaret Mead is that she had this Western idyllic vision of what paradise would be. She thinks, that, for example, husbands beating their wives would be a bad thing. So she wanted to suppress any notion that there was domestic abuse or abuse within the family. And so, but what we have to get over with our Western minds is that domestic abuse is a bad thing. And so I raise my hand and say, well, what about the Aztecs? The many ancient civilizations engaged in human sacrifice. They would kill human beings to appease the gods. The Aztecs would literally rip the hearts out of living children at the top of their temples. And do you think, isn't that a bad thing, Professor?
Can we at least say that much? And what did your professors say?
Oh, Mr. Valliant, it's your ethnocentric. You've got Eurocentric values that says that, organized social murder is a bad thing, that killing children, there's something wrong with that. And what you have to do is get over these obviously culturally created biases of yours that come from your tribe, your collective, which is generating, my collective, my tribe, and I start bringing up Enlightenment values, John Locke and individual rights. Oh, no.
I mean,
that's all Western prejudice, ethnocentrism. Get that out of your head. If people want to kill children, we just have to accept it morally and emotionally.
Would he put the professor, would he actually put his hide where his mouth is and say, I'm the first, hey, why don't next week, for a special demonstration in class, I'm going to have you all rip my heart out and make a sacrifice to the gods.
I think he would have stopped short at letting himself be murdered to appease the gods. But get this.
What a hypocrite.
But get this, he was so proud, but he did to some extent put his money where his mouth is. He went and explored the Kaguru in East Africa up close and personal, like a good field anthropologist. And he said there were times when he was starved. There were times when he was mistreated. But of course, I have to accept that. That's more than that. He would go to things like you've heard of the Sundance Festival of the Sioux,
Sure.
the Sioux natives in the United States. Some of their rituals involve masochism and the infliction of pain. They literally hook themselves onto their chests, are hooked so that they can be suspended by cords. And it is the endurance of pain, this horrific sadomasochistic ritual in which they endure pain. And he proudly would lower his shirt to show the scars that he got from participating in that ritual. So you see, Mr. Valliant, things like pain and masochism and my being abused. See, the Kaguru were a matriarchal society, he argued, and therefore I was a man and had to accept my second-class status. So if they wanted to abuse me and starve me, that was their way of looking at it. And we can't know our way of looking at it.
You don't know whether to admire his integrity or to be disgusted that he lived up to these disgusting ideas that he held.
Think of the mental damage that bad philosophy does.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously twists the mind so that it cannot grasp, understand, be certain of any of its values, undermines all of your values, so that you actually think of pain and abuse and sexism, the murder of children. It can go that far. They say, that's okay. That's just their culture.
And as disgusting as the self-destruction is, that he lives that and infects other minds with it. And then we talk about where we're at in 2022. As a result of that kind of, again, not the action, but the ideas.
The ideas.
But here's another thing. In the article, Leonard Peikoff talks about, you've got some sort of morality test of, how moral you are. Some idiot put together, and he's like, well, your wife is dying of a rare cancer. The pharmacist is going to be charging you $2,000 or something, and so there is no thought about it, because the ultimate correct question in this multiple choice is you need to steal from the pharmacist to get these pills for your wife.
The premise is that he's overcharging for the drug. It costs him very little to make. You don't have the money to pay for it. Therefore, what do you do? Yeah.
So I mean, it jumps to, in altruism, it jumps to, how can I mitigate the suffering of my wife? Instead of even. So there is no thought or no consideration with regard to the pharmacist or the pharmaceutical company and how many billions of dollars they put into this medicine and all of the hours and all these people that need to be paid. And that's why it's $2,000. There is zero consideration. There is zero thought. And it's just kind of a compulsive reaction to, I need this now. There is suffering. We must end the suffering. And then you get your professor who is obviously a suffering worshiper. I mean, it is, we were talking about altruism a couple of weeks ago on our show, and you get to the point where, like, these people are a bunch of heathens. They have absolutely no clue what morality is for, what it should be used for, and it should be based in the nature of man and what that is and what those questions are. They have no clue about even what to ask.
Nothing. And notice altruism, the ethical upshot of altruism, is accepted almost as an axiom and a given. Why? because it feels, because of course they've been trained in altruism, right? Religion and Kant and everyone has trained them in altruism so thoroughly that they don't realize that actually it's that education, that there was Kant or their religious education that convinced them that sacrifice was a noble thing, duty was a noble thing. And so rather than recognizing the philosophical basis of that and being able to say, okay, I want to take that on. Hey, wait a minute here. Maybe this sacrifice isn't a good thing. Maybe hurting the pharmacist would do more damage to more sick people than, no, we don't want to even go there. How about the pharmacist's right to do what he's doing? Why don't I start challenging this, at least on some? No. We're going to accept the moral framework of altruism, walking in the door. And none of your economic or ethical arguments are going to faze me one bit, Mr. Valliant. We're going to accept it on an emotional basis, because after all, it is just your emotions versus mine if we don't have reason.
It's another case where it's fascinating to me, and yet it makes perfect sense that people, again, this intelligent, but coming from this space. Now, these are people who understand the difference between pragmatism and intrinsicism and consequentialism and moral theories, and yet they're completely subject to that frozen abstraction. It's just, what is morality? Well, first of all, morality is altruism. No, altruism is no. Morality is, we replace the whole field and all those possibilities with one thing. I have to take just a moment to acknowledge Super Chat from Ed Salantiev. Thank you very much for £4.49. Very much appreciated. And one more from Jeff Bannister.
Oh, thanks, Jeff.
And $50. There's a story behind this one. I won't get into the whole story, maybe at the end, but he says save this for the end. So I'll save it for the end, but thank you very much for that, Jeff. The question I have would be, because it is a war of ideas, and it's obviously the ideas underneath that are manifesting nowadays. I guess it's been a few years since social justice warriors and safe space seeking snowflakes. Now it's CRT advocates, critical race theory advocates, which I see as all the same phenomenon. It's going to be something different 5 years from now. 5 years ago, it was Occupy Wall Street, and then it was BLM and Antifa. 5 years from now, we won't even remember what BLM stands for, but it will be a whole new thing. And again, based on these exact same ideas. And I guess the question is, do you think it's gotten worse since 1983, or are we pretty much fighting the same intellectual battle and at the same level?
My answer would go back to what we were saying before. I think that things have gotten worse from the field from our academic friends. It really has. There's less and less of a veneer of even respect for reason. Now, I think there is a counter movement, though. I think that's the difference, is that today there is a growing, and maybe not the 1% that Dr. Peikoff thought would be enough. If we could just have 1 in 100. It may not yet even be the 1%, but at least there are voices, critical, serious intellectual voices, even academic voices, and popular books even, that are challenging certain ideas out there. We mentioned Pinker, but look how he undermines his own case. The best alternative are from Aristotelians, and among the Aristotelians, the best alternative, obviously, are the objectivists. And at least, though, there is a counter movement underway. We may not be 1%, but we do have some prominent voices, and it's growing in number. So things have gotten worse, or pretty much the same, at least, overall. We sure haven't dug ourselves out of the hole that Dr. Peikoff was talking about. One of the commentators at Facebook, when I was advertising this talk here last night, said, wait a minute here. It's not the professor. It's not like college professors are going like Sherman through the South and in his successful march to the sea. They're not the ones responsible. It's our policymakers in Washington, he said. It's the policy. So the question, where do these policies come from?
Yes.
Yeah.
They do not come from themselves. They don't grow on trees. They aren't the automatic upshot of human instinct. They actually do come from ideas. And as we were just saying, it's the stale, dead, hoary old, empty altruism with a series of Marxist premises that are just sort of the leftover default decaying answers that are just the givens, just the emotional fallback default that intellectuals have today. That is how empty an enemy we're facing. So maybe the most optimistic thing is just how empty the other side is, because it's not as though they've come out with strong intellectual arguments for their side. Quite the opposite. They're just recycling ever weaker and staler versions of the same old junk.
Yeah, I like how you put that hoary old altruism. Very good.
Well, yeah, I mean, it really is. Why? Why is this? You were talking about that moral test that Leonard Peikoff laid out, and the ranking of that. Okay, my wife, I'm doing it for my spouse, my husband or something. Okay, well, that's okay because you're doing it for someone else. Still better, though, higher on the ranking would be, well, humanity and life in general, some vague abstraction.
Let's just hoard the pharmacy. Let's send in our Vikings and take it over and pillage. That's going to really help. Right. Yeah. Going back to that, I was thinking, the title of this, The Assault from the Ivory Tower, what do you think of that? When you think of that, you think of the medieval, thugs who would pour boiling oil over the students who are walking into the university. And then I thought, that's actually the boiling oil is actually kind of a good example because, when these kids were taught this anti-reason philosophy, it stuck on them. It damaged them.
I tell you, when I would walk into a philosophy class or an anthropology class or at law school, when I would walk into a class on legal realism, another point Leonard Peikoff discusses in this, law is, not only, well, we can get into it in a couple of contexts that I know, both history and law. He starts out, history is what historians say it is. What a Kantian assertion. And I kind of covered that with Howard Zinn. He says, history is what I, looking at it from the perspective of this group, because I'm sensitive to the perspective of this group, say it is. In law, there was exactly the equivalent. I would go through civil and criminal procedure and constitutional law, and I'd say, oh, well, this makes it objective. This makes our process of proof and evidence and due process, innocent until proven guilty, the objective basis of evidence, having consistent laws that apply fairly to everybody. Boy, that makes this decision-making process good and excellent. No, Mr. Valliant. Law is in effect what judges say it is. And we have to get, just like with history, and you just have to get over that. Instead of worrying about what the founding fathers thought or what these great legal experts in the past thought the function of law was, we just have to turn it over to the voice of the people, in particular groups. So what do women think? What does this minority think? What does the LGBT community think? Law should be, in effect, the emotional outpouring of whoever's got the biggest gang at the time, as opposed to a rational procedure of settling disputes in court. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Can you imagine, like Dr. Peikoff says, can you imagine going into a physician, a medical doctor, and right? And what are you saying? Oh, there's no objective medicine here. Medicine is whatever I say it is. What I really need to do is to get you over this anxiety about having cancer. It's not really the cancer that's the problem, right? Can you imagine the equivalent in a physical science or medicine?
Well, actually, that does happen with regard to women's medicine still, but it is getting better with regard to you've got this pain, you must be depressed. Here's some antidepressants.
The first. How often is it the case? I hate this. A lot of times it's women who go into their doctors. And why is it that their doctor, male and female doctors, I've noticed women have complained about this. The first thing they'll say to a woman patient is, "How are you happy, romantic? How are things at home? Are you depressed?
Fill out this questionnaire about your mental health.
This question. Have you had suicidal thoughts? You have a hard time getting out of bed some mornings. Wait a minute. No, I'm having a pain here over here. Could you please? No. That really, it's true.
But that is getting better. People are a little bit more aware. And not going down that road. Thankfully,
not quite that path. Truth is truth.
Yes.
As a white male, I am capable of understanding the perspective of other people. I'm capable of understanding the perspective of women. I am capable of understanding the perspective of Hispanics. I'm capable of understanding the perspective of someone richer than me and poorer than me. Believe it or not, just as they, using reason, are capable of understanding me, a white middle class dude from America. So
That's a remarkably bold assertion there. That must be
bold
your
assertion on my
privilege
part.
speaking there.
We're not islands. We're not island. And get this,
Yeah.
tribal islands, separated
Right.
from one another, unable to dialogue. But what are we seeing in classes today? We
Yeah.
segregate little children by race.
Yeah,
that
You just
whole
want to.
idea is terrifying to me.
Yeah.
Well, since we're discussing now we're getting to the point of discussing objectivity versus those who would teach our children this modern.
Well, you've got to stand up and say reason is an attribute of the individual and nothing else.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Reason and individualism are, as Peikoff points out here, go hand in hand. The mind is an attribute of the individual. Only individuals are capable of thought.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone, if you do turn your mind over to someone, then you are just like some religious fanatic assigning his mind, turning his mind over to the group or to God or whatever authority that happens along. You're surrendering your mind altogether. Reason is an individual phenomenon, or it is nothing.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that was the argument of the founding fathers. Everyone should be left to pursue their own happiness, make their own best life by their own individual best judgment. Because guess what? Reason is competent. Most people are perfectly capable of using reason to bring order and happiness to their life if they're given the freedom and chance to do so. And frankly, American history largely proved that out. And that, going back to the original thing that Robert said, unlike other countries, there is a giant chasm between intellectuals and the people. In most countries, the intellectuals are going to defend something about their country, find something about their country, even if it's totally irrational and mystic, even if it's their religion, even if it's some weird tradition that they have, they're going to find something good they love about their country. The artists and intellectuals. America, particularly in the last 150 years, has been systematic in having their artists and intellectuals in a absolute war against the basic values of America: reason, individualism, freedom, capitalism. It is remarkable. And a lot of people talk about populism in American politics today. That is kind of the direct result. The difference between, say, truck drivers, to use the current example, the difference between truck drivers and college professors is so powerful and so eloquent in North America that it's kind of obvious. Really, it's become almost visually obvious in the news today. And Leonard Peikoff, his famous line to me in an interview he gave to me, was talking to him about PhDs. He would say, sight unseen, I would rather have lunch with a truck driver. That was his example back in the 90s, by the way. Sight unseen, I'd rather have lunch with a truck driver than with a college professor. That is to say, if I couldn't read during lunch.
Yeah. I vaguely remember Ayn Rand made the same remark, that she would trust the instincts, and we don't mean philosophical instincts, but she would trust the instincts of truck drivers over college professors any day.
Because the original values of America are much better than the intellectual values that come from, and that was the problem with American intellectuals.
And they haven't been destroyed completely yet.
Turned their minds over to German philosophers. This is what they did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kant, Hegel, Marx, Freud suddenly became the creators of the intellectual culture of the next century and a half. A totally un-American, anti-American development, frankly.
Yes. Just to go to the super chat real quick. Incidentally, I mentioned AynRandCenter.co.uk, become a member. And I mentioned there's a silver level, a gold level, a platinum level Daniel behind the scenes. The producer of the show today reminds me that the fourth level is actually called, appropriately enough, the Reardon Medal level.
Oh, so that's of course what it is.
Those of you who have the means to, for your own selfish reasons, be able to contribute at that £100 a month level, you can contribute at the Reardon Medal level.
And I should say real quick, because this is going into the super chat here.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie in the chat, she didn't give us the super chat, but she did remind us that she is a member of ARCUK, and then she posed a question.
Oh,
which
what was her question?
Well, it kind of goes along with my question, which was it kind of blends in with my question. And my question is basically, when Leonard Peikoff in the article, he was talking about all of these, I'll just call them knuckleheads who were saying, well, everything is very subjective and everything, but that doesn't mean we need to stop our pursuit of what our subjective truth is. And we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep researching. We're going to keep trying to find things that we still can't understand, but we're just going to keep at it. And I thought to myself, what on earth are they even talking about? Why are they keeping going? I mean, is it something that
That's all there is. It's the best you can do.
It's the best you can do. But I mean, does that mean that there's maybe perhaps a tiny, tiny bit of them that thinks to themselves, gosh, this philosophical stuff is a bunch of hooey, and I'm just going to keep on with my pursuit of knowledge. And
Apparently not.
No, but maybe not.
Well, that's exactly it. I would literally, fortunately, as I say, this lecture came out right in the midst of my own undergraduate experience. And so I would literally formulate the question as Dr. Peikoff puts it here. Look, if we can't know any truth in philosophy, if we can't know any truth in history, the subjects I was studying, I would ask the professor, then why don't we just close the tent up and go home?
Yes.
What's the whole point of doing history if we can never achieve knowledge in history?
Yes.
Oh, no. And Peikoff has the most amusing response, of course, here. I'm doing my research to get a government grant. And if I don't continue researching this thing, and I know I'm never going to get the truth, but it'll allow me at least to open up other questions where I can get another government grant. So the purpose, you see, of research, and especially in the humanities and social sciences, is to get a government grant. It's not to answer any question, because we know we're never going to answer any question. It's a full employment for intellectuals act is what it is. It's not a truth-seeking exercise at all.
Well, that helps raise the answer, but just a part of it to Stephanie's question, because she says, well, okay, what is the motive for rejecting the concept of certainty? And my short answer, which you'll give a better one, is part of it is exactly that pragmatic. This is how you get the money. This is how you get tenure. This is how the game is played. So part of it's pure nihilism / pragmatism. They don't care about truth or principles or morality. This is how the game is played. But I think there's much more to that. I think there's a deeper answer in the fact that this is a war of ideas. And on some level, they actually believe this stuff. They really think this is as good as philosophy gets. And when confronted with objectivism, they've closed their eyes and said, well, no, this stuff I've been taught all my life, this is the way it is.
You can get into all manner of psychological explanations, because oftentimes I get the feeling that it's their feelings that they're mostly concerned about. There's something emotional here that's uncomfortable to me or really desirable for me, and that's really what I'm doing. I'm sort of doing what Ayn Rand called emotional generalization. Rather than thinking about things, you end up, of course, with a confused, contradictory hash of things you've just absorbed from the culture in general. You take your emotions for granted because you don't understand the ideas they're based on, but those emotions serve as basic axioms. They're the givens. They're what we go from here. And I'm not going to yield on this emotion. And so no matter how objective your argument, no matter how logical, fact-based, persuasive, taking into account everything you can take into account, you're never going to persuade them because there's this emotional thing, and that's just your truth. They want an out from reason. And they want, for emotional reasons, whatever the psychology is. And philosophy has given them this giant rationalization for doing so. In effect, it's liberated the neurosis of every intellectual out there, so that whatever their emotional neurosis is, see, I feel resentment because of the group I belong to. I feel resentments because of how, some experience I had as a kid. I remember what mother taught me. And so they're bringing, without knowing it, they're bringing all this philosophical baggage, unidentified to them, in the form of emotions to the subject, and and philosophers have given them the rationalization to use their emotions freely and to dismiss anyone's logical or fact-based argument.
Yes, and again, that's why I think that there are many answers to that question. None of them are completely innocent, but some of them are substantially more guilty than others.
Yes, that's the way I'd put it. There's degrees of guilt and evasion and emotionalism.
Excellent.
actually. You know, and their minds have decided, I think the really important answer was the one you gave earlier, though, Robert. Their minds, to some degree, have in fact absorbed these errors. We spoke, for example, about the analytic-synthetic dichotomy. Now think about that. They have truly absorbed. Now, what would happen to your mind if you truly absorbed that? You'd be like Leonard Peikoff's professor from that essay, right? Oh, yeah. You've given me your deduction and your logic, and yeah, well, let's talk fact now, because
Yeah.
that's all tautology.
Yeah.
That's
Are you
all
talking
logic.
about what I teach you all day, or are you talking about real life?
Real life, you know? And so they've absorbed that dichotomy, for example. And to the extent you absorb these philosophical falsehoods, you are, again, sort of diseasing your own mind from being able to see the truth in the first instance.
Yes.
Yes.
Let me go back to the super chat again, just because the money is coming in. Thank you for
Mhm.
supporting ARCUK. Jeff Bannister
Yes.
is in again and says, great students want accreditation from established schools. Peikoff asked those conservative students to endure the onslaught, persevere, get their degree, and then teach better ideas. And Jeff says, I loved that. That's a tall order. But yeah, certainly, if there are heroes out there who can do it,
I
more
had to
power
do it
to them.
myself. I put the clothespin in my nose and I held my nose for 4 years to get a philosophy degree from a university with a good philosophy department. You just have to do that. And the better, as Peikoff points out, you know, if you the higher you go to Ivy League, go to Harvard or Columbia, you really have to put the clothespin on your nose, because you're really going to get straight tap evil. The better the university is, and NYU is listed as one of the if not the best philosophy pro. I had to go there, get my philosophy degree, and do this because I would have famous professors like Thomas Nagel, was a very famous philosopher at the time. I asked my question, you know, and Jim, the more I consider these issues, the less I think we're ever going to find any of the answers.
And that's what I
Any
wonder
of
is,
the answers.
Yeah.
So again,
if you
what
do
are we
that-
doing here, Professor? What are we doing here? Or I'd go to law school and I'd have someone say, oh, yeah. It's not a question of having an objective or fair legal procedure. Oh, that's the wrong way to approach law. We have to actually just listen to the emotions and voices of the interest groups involved, the tribes involved. And that's what good law considers. That's legal realism, don't you know?
Yes.
That's legal realism, not wanting an objective procedure to fairly resolve human disputes. That's not what law is about.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Realism. Anytime I hear anybody use the word realism, I have to ask, do you mean what I would mean by that? Or no, you mean...
Well, it's like Kant using reason, right?
Yes.
The one thing I know we're not going to get is reason. Someone says, let's be realistic. The one thing I know we're not going to do is be fact-based. You've signaled to me the opposite. That's a sad case.
I want to thank Jonathan Honig for the $19.99 US and Larry Green for $10 US. Thank you very much. Very generous to you both. Thank you.
Very generous people today. Thank you very much.
And I just want to, before we go, I want to recount my story about when I was 18 and I was in high school and I was taking a humanities course. And at the time I was transferring over to my Nietzschean existentialism to trying to understand Ayn Rand. At that point, I had read Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead and Anthem, and that's it. But so I had this teacher named, okay, get this, his name was Delton Beowulf. And I tell you, he looked exactly like Ayn Rand, how she described Ellsworth Toohey, had the same kind of name. Oh, it was awful. He would be up in class. He would just ramble on his own disconnected, disjointed philosophical and psychological ideas, you know, from I mean, he was really a nutcase. He would get up and he would just pound his fist on the table and he said, I cannot believe people out there some of them don't believe in God. I can't believe that. And then he would go into the collective unconsciousness idea from Carl Jung. And then he would talk about subliminal messages in advertising. And I mean, he was just crazy. But I knew that, you know, despite his wackiness and all of that, I mean, the guy was evil. There was a group of us sitting there, and unfortunately, at the time, I didn't have my intellectual chops to really discuss things with him. I thought to myself, you know, how am I going to discuss these things with him when he's anti-reason? He thinks that you can somehow be, you know, influenced by subliminal messages and all of this stuff, and that your ideas are not under your conscious control and all of this. And it's just, so what I did was I went to class every day, and but I refused to do any of the homework. I just went there just so that I could have an exercise in philosophical detection and kind of see for myself exactly what was going on here. And I decided very early on that I was going to make a point of not passing this class. So, and we were talking earlier about this, and there was yes, I shrugged, and I was sitting there.
You shrugged.
And my mom was there with me, and we were having a parent-teacher conference, and I was sitting there, and he kept looking at me, and he was totally bewildered and baffled, and he said, why aren't you doing the homework? Why aren't you doing? And I just refused to talk to the guy. It was kind of surreal. But I thought to myself, you know what? This is the right thing to do, is not to try to reason with him, but to make a point of, I'm making a point of failing his class on purpose. And then I can leave him with, whatever reason he thinks of why I'm doing this. But I was fine. I graduated by taking a summer class.
You had to make up for it. You did a conscious decision, but you had to make up for it. No, you did. But there's a really great point, though, that Dr. Peikoff and Ayn Rand, even before him, made. In a social context, sometimes the most powerful thing, even in a classroom context, maybe even more powerfully, the most powerful thing sometimes we can say is just no, or
Right.
just I disagree.
Mm-hmm.
And you are in effect by your behavior saying that I'm rebelling against this altogether. And that has to get under their skin.
Yeah.
And I've known teachers and professors for whom that kind of reaction does get under their skin. And so here you have obviously an intelligent young person like you. It must have really bothered him that a smart young person is not fully buying in at all this junk I'm dishing out, just accepting it, as I spoon it out. That must have really bothered him.
Yeah, and it was so satisfying. It was satisfying for me too. So,
and that's
Before you ever
sometimes
read
the
Atlas
best
Shrugged.
we can do. And sometimes that's the best we can do, is just say to them, no, I'm not buying your crap. Nope, sorry.
Yep.
And if we were to don't do it as Peikoff says, if you think you're going to get downgraded, though. At university or professional school, your career may be at stake here. Don't become a martyr for this. There are occasions when sometimes just being quiet and going along and feeding back the professor what he wants so you can get your stamp of approval to move on is what you're after. I wouldn't be dishonest. I never was overtly dishonest in any paper I did at school, but I definitely sometimes was just trying to, I know,
Yes.
I learned, this guy said this guy's, and as you pointed out, Professor, and then just leave it like that. He would, in most of my classes, my professors got hey, that guy disagrees. And registering that, though, in some way, that undermines their confidence, believe it or not, because they don't have facts and logic on their side. All they have is this collective emotional mush on their side. And so having an intelligent student saying, no, I disagree, will have an impact on them and the rest of the class, by the way.
And on top of that, you need to survive to be one of those heroes that Jeff Bannister talked about. I have to say, Dr. Peikoff was hard-pressed to end his speech on an up note. He said, "To those of you in the college trenches today, therefore, I have only a bleak conclusion to offer. And even if I am an atheist, I know no better way to say it. God bless you and God help you." Now, it's 2022. And here's my question. Is the growth of private schools like the Van Dam Academy and school vouchers and school choice and charter schools and networks of Montessori schools like Guidepost and especially Higher Ground, Matt Bateman's group, proposed new universities like the University of Austin, with founding faculty members like Peter Boghossian and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and mainstream universities with objectivist professors like Tara Smith and C. Bradley Thompson and Gina Gorlin and Gregory Salmieri. Are these cause for some small degree of hope?
Yes. If I was a literature student in 1983, I could not have gone to the University of Virginia and studied from Shoshana Knapp. If I was interested in ancient Greek philosophy, there'd be no one out there practically, right, who would be, although it was a little better because there were some Aristotelians, but now consider the Aristotelians out there like Lennox, and you think about the different world we live in now. If I wanted to become get a background, real background in ethics. There's Professor Tara Smith out there. And so you make a really, really good point, don't you? We have a world in which there are better, now think about it. Kids, my friends, people I went to high school with, are sending, now that they've got kids and grandkids, they're sending their kids to the Van Damme Academy. They're sending their kids to better schools. And at least there are alternatives out there. At least there's something out there that can provide an alternative. And they are, I think, the hope for the world. And I would add one more thing. Ayn Rand Center UK, the things that we're doing, like these discussions of Ayn Rand essays or Leonard Peikoff essays, what we're doing is we're advertising and exposing a greater worldwide audience to these ideas.
Yes.
And it is institutions like this that can make the difference in spreading the ideas of reason and individualism all over the world, and create a community of advocates of reason and individualism. And that's really the big change over the last 40 years.
Well, that's a great point. Someday, James, we need to do an episode, whether on this show or on Thursday's show, but we need to do a whole episode on, has Ayn Rand already saved the world several times over?
I think so.
So many people are waiting for objectivism to win. I'll put up the air quotes there. And we know what that would look like. Better government, better society, better mores.
Right.
But in many ways, where would we be without all of the people who have already been influenced by it, even people who weren't objectivists? But she has saved the world, in my mind, many times over already.
It's so funny because, so a lot of leftists will say, well, you see, Ayn Randism completely trumped or completely was refuted with Trump or with George W. Bush. And you see your last couple of Republican presidents, they were such disasters. George W. Bush bails out Wall Street as we're screaming bloody murder. Donald Trump, of course, is ending tariffs and sounding like I won't get into Trump right now. But no, as far as they're concerned, that refutes Ayn Rand's ideas. The truth of the matter is, though, when you look at it from the other perspective, we have made precious little impact on, say, federal government policy, but we have had save the day moments where we stopped something bad from happening or changed the dialogue in a certain way.
I don't think people realize how much worse it could be.
Yes. That would be a very good program, in fact. A lot of people don't realize that it was students of Ayn Rand who were, at least from the political, in the 1970s after the Vietnam War, there was a lot of criticism of the draft, and the resistance to getting rid of the draft was coming from the right. But it was students of Ayn Rand who ended that. And so there was an ending of military conscription in the 1970s. Just start right there. That it was, to a large extent, the product of Ayn Rand, and at least her influence on certain public intellectuals that made the difference. And I think a whole discussion of this might be a positive way, a more positive, uplifting way of looking at this.
And honestly, I mean, I know that Ayn Rand has a lot of influence with regard to people in Bulgaria, for instance, people in Europe, even more so than 10 years ago. And I can't help but think, I don't have evidence for this, but I can't help but think that has trickled down to, say, perhaps maybe Zelensky's, the president of Ukraine's moral conviction, moral stance, and how he's actually been conducting this defensive war, possibly, or other thinkers around that area, actually.
I could do a whole show on why I think Hillary didn't get Hillary Care in 93, why she abandoned Ayn Rand after her Ayn Rand period, but it made a difference, why we ended up with Joe Biden instead of Bernie Sanders. We could have a great hour with that, but I real quick have to go back to the super chat. Jeff Bannister, $50. I think it's the biggest single super chat I've seen on any show that I've done. And he says, save this for the end. Last week's show I missed. Robert and Amy were kind enough in a direct message on Twitter to answer a question I had on We the Living. Thanks for explaining how Leonard Peikoff described her reason for doing what troubled me. It helped. The ending of We the Living, if you've read the novel, it can be challenging. And you think, why did it turn out like that? Why didn't it have a happier ending? I won't give too many spoilers, but we had an interesting discussion about that online. Jeff, thank you. I'm glad you found that answer so helpful that you
Thank
are
you.
generously supporting the ARCUK. Everybody else, get on that super chat. But I think we have covered this extraordinary, and again, the very first Ford Hall Forum speech that Leonard Peikoff gave. In my show notes link is on Twitter, notes are on Facebook. You will find the direct link to ARI's page on Leonard Peikoff's Ford Hall Forum series. All 14 of his talks are there, and some of them are amazing talks. But some of them are just, oh my gosh, my 30 years with Ayn Rand and intellectual memoir will get you choked up by the end. If it doesn't, have somebody check your pulse.
I can't listen to read that without crying. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, all that is in the show notes. Take a look online. James, thank you so much for this discussion of Assault from the Ivory Tower.
Thank you.
Leonard Peikoff's first Ford Hall Forum talk. He was right about everything. Some things have gotten worse. In some ways, though, some things are more understandable now.
Right.
Seeing what happened then.
Right. But as you say, he was a prophet. As usual, he nailed the future that was to come, and we're living in the future exactly as he predicted it. That is true. If you do like this content, as Robert says, please do consider becoming a regular subscriber to Ayn Rand Center UK. There's all kinds of benefits. This is the stuff that everyone can take advantage of, but there's all kinds of perks if you become a paid subscriber. Don Watkins Communication Bootcamp, the seminars we do on Leonard Peikoff courses on Sundays, and other stuff. So in any event, hit like, hit subscribe, hit share, comment. The more you do that kind of stuff, the more it helps us. The more it helps us keep the lights on around here and creating an international community that advocates for reason and individualism and freedom.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
This has been great. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Robert.
You guys.
Looking forward to next